Good morning. Recently, I was telling a story, and somewhere within that story, to make a point, I used an old story within the story, and it dawned on me that that story, the story within the story, the short story to try to explain the bigger story, was worthy in and of itself of a sharing. I noticed, I was always a student of behavior, and I've had always particular interest in group behavior, and being a teacher gave me ample opportunity. Indeed, my classroom was always my laboratory, both to explore and understand myself and how I was uniquely qualified to contribute to the thinking process of my students I was entrusted with. So always look to the strengths. Discover your strengths. And it's never more apparent when you have like I said, a laboratory. And you've got living, breathing beings alive and available to you, alive in your experiment and available for your experimentation. But it's the motivation. The motivation is totally aimed at both improving yourself so that you're better equipped to help in the improvement process of those that were entrusted to your care. I always call my students Taiwan's treasure because they were the future. And it was afforded me an opportunity, even in the most modest of assumptions, that I could contribute to the betterment of Taiwan's society by totally focusing on the treasures they had entrusted and gifted me with. So this opportunity to improve my own abilities, to enhance the innate characteristics that I possess that would put me in a unique position to fully utilize this opportunity, this entrustment with and of Taiwan's treasure, her youth. And one of the remarkable things was how, as a group, they were able to pull back, to stifle the individualization of those brave, daring, perhaps even foolish enough to want to be differentiated, to stand out, to be unique. Those that were seeking their uniqueness instead of the mean, which is the commonalities, the similarities. This group behavior was unbeknowingly, for most part, given to the students through their education system that was intended to protect and prolong the status quo of those running the show, those calling the shots, those in government. So there was this, even though it was stressed that you wanted to be number one, everybody was supposed to be number one. Every parent was so proud when their son or daughter was in the top of the list. But somehow they were supposed to accomplish this exceptionality without the development of the unique characteristics of their personality. Somehow you were supposed to stand out without standing out. You're supposed to be number one, and everyone knew who was number one. Everyone strove to be number one. But other than pleasing the parents, there seemed to be very little point. It certainly didn't seem to help the self-esteem of the students. They had bragging rights, but they weren't allowed to brag. So it was to accomplish extraordinariness, to be extraordinary, while at the same time succumbing to the mediocrity of commonality, which the students enforce with a hierarchy that I couldn't understand. Let me give you an example. Cheating is rampant here. And I'm not saying that it's any more or less rampant in any other time or place or culture or people. But because the stress is on being the top, it's an exam-driven system. Your whole life is dependent on your ability to get into the finest schools, to get into the top tiers through testing. So exams were really important. And even the most mediocre, the most disinterested, the most disaffected, uninvolved student would do their best, either through legitimate means of hunkering down and cramming before the exam, staying up all night, or by becoming very effective cheaters. And cheating for an academic, cheating for me, was one of the most intolerable behaviors that I would encounter with my students. But I had a double bind. I hated cheating, but I also was very cogent, very aware of the fact that my Chinese language speaking abilities put the student at a disadvantage. And it put me at a disadvantage too, in that they weren't able to present their case to me of maybe I misunderstood, maybe I misviewed, maybe I was wrong in my assessment that they were cheating. So this was a conundrum. I had to deal with this, and I was responsible. It was on me to learn the language well enough so that they were able to defend themselves in their mother tongue instead of trying to defend themselves in their second language. Explain. Maybe not defend, maybe explain, pontificate, illuminate. And it made me very reluctant to call a spade, to call them on their cheating. So it really presented me with a problem, when problems can be opportunities. How to resolve this plague of cheating. Do you turn a blind eye? Because I didn't feel correct in challenging them for cheating, for calling them on cheating. It's quite a charge after all. And they're deserving of an opportunity to defend themselves, which they couldn't with me, for the most part, because my Chinese was lacking and their English was lacking, and never the twain shall meet. So I'm going to go into my, I think, unique resolution of this problem. How did I come to terms with something that just goes against every bone in my body, cheating? And I'll share more about cheating, but I want to talk about first the story I was telling, the small story within the larger story. And again, maybe this is an example. The small story is when maybe my larger story is the resolution, what I did about cheating without compromising either my standards or their ability to, their God-given innate ability to defend themselves against such a harsh and damaging accusation. But we're dealing first with this tendency towards mediocrity, to the middleness, to not standing out, to not developing their selves, to their just the social pressure was so huge, and I had to learn through osmosis, through observation, through the absorption of what was going on. Why, when someone would ask a question, would others snicker? Why, when someone would attempt an answer, would others laugh out loud and call them names, make unkind comments? And I realized that it was the pull of mediocrity. It's kind of guised in this desire to be alike, to fit in with the group, the importance of the group, the importance of the pressure of the group. And here it was seen. So potential individualism, potential greatness was mired in the commonness of mediocrity, sameness. So I remember a story from years before. I always had an inquisitive mind until it wasn't. Until the time came when I ran out of questions. But I was full of questions for most of my life, particularly my adolescence, my formal education. Inquisitive, searching for answers, and never quite satisfied until I had delved into it deep enough to satisfy my intellectual curiosity. So I was riding my bike home one day from the airport. I worked at the airport. It was quite a ride from the airport to Waikiki. 20 minutes by car, an hour and a half by bicycle. But it was a nice ride, and I had my alternative routes. And one of the routes took me close to this bridge that it's a pedestrian bridge, essentially, and it crossed over a brackish body of water where the mountain stream ran into the incoming tide. And this was perfect environment for a lot of species, particularly crabs. And the fishermen would come, and this pedestrian path was great because they could, the night before, they could lower their nets, tie them on the railing, lower them in the crab catchers, the crab nets. Then in the morning, they would come and reel in their catch. So I found this quite interesting. I was just caught the fishermen coming to bring up the nets. Had many, 20, 30 nets. And he pulled it up with each 2 or 3 crabs. Quite a haul of crabs. And he had a bucket. And then he had a bucket beside him, kind of behind him, and he would, as he unloaded the crabs, released them took them, they were fighting for their plankton. He peeled them off and put them in the bucket. Peeled them off, put them in the bucket. He never had a second glance for the bucket. He almost automatic. He'd throw them in the bucket, throw them in the bucket, throw them in the bucket. And I was noticing that the bucket was almost full of crabs. So I asked the fisherman the obvious question. I said, "Oh, aren't you concerned that they'll escape? Some will get out. I mean, it's almost full. It'll be almost overflowing soon." He says, "No, I don't even give it a second glance, because the crabs themselves will reach up and pull back any crab that tried to escape." And I had visioned in my mind how, one crab would get out and put the claw back and pull another one, and how they could cooperate. Out of ignorance, I thought the crabs could cooperate to save their lives, for their liberation. Because one thing I know about prey, animals that are caught, they're aware of their predicament, even on a fundamental level of a crab consciousness. But the crab consciousness was counterproductive to their survival in this particular. Maybe there was a time when they needed to pull each other down. Maybe in their life, maybe they protected from another kind of prey. I don't know why they developed this mechanism. I'm sure it was based on self-preservation, but in this case, it was contributing to their ultimate demise. And the way he just said is, no, they just pull themselves back into the bucket. And I remember really having a powerful aha moment. And the crab story came to the front of my mind in my classroom when I started to share with the students, in the hopes that I might make a little dent in this ironclad social contract that they had of keeping each other in continual and constant mediocrity. Again, maybe it was self-survival. The Chinese had the saying that if a pig sticks up, you pound it in. So maybe it was started from this, that it was survival sense. But what it did is was designed by the powers that be to keep the people compliant. Don't let them reach levels where they begin questioning the powers that be. Keep them at acceptance. Keep them easily manipulated by the group. there's a group consciousness which I was very aware of that had little to do with the individuals that made it up. The sum is greater than the parts, I guess, but I could see from years of watching classrooms that classrooms would definitely develop a unique personality, and I tried to tailor my teaching to the personality of the group. Very interesting how this process, it happens on a cerebral or less than cerebral, below cerebral levels. Boy, my tongue feels fat today. Be that as it may. So I shared the story with them about the crabs. And I think for the great part, my story was lost, as probably most of my stories are, because it was in English. But maybe the impact. I certainly, as one student once told me, teacher, give up on trying to change the Chinese. We won't change. And nothing you could say, do, or be will make us change. But I like to flatter myself that maybe in the smallest way I might contribute to some wiggle room for those who needed, who wanted, who yearned to be all that they could be. So this is my crab story, and that's what I call today's sharing. We tend, as a group, to pull each other down into commonality. And unfortunately, our levels of commonality are less than optimal, to put it kindly. So I don't know if this story got through, but it really helped me. And I finally got a chance to use this life lesson that I learned from the fishermen about behavior. And as the concept of a group is such an overpowering, I don't think, it doesn't matter what level, the herd mentality kind of dominates. Certainly doesn't take a stretch to see it in the animal kingdom and the pecking order. As my Thai friend once told me with the biggest smile on his face, the big fish eats the little fish. This is the way of things. And one of my goals with education is to understand the way of things, accept what's acceptable, and chip away at less than desirable behavior that is limiting the potential of my proteges. So the crab story. Now I want to go to the bigger story surrounding the crab story. And this is about cheating behavior, how to deal with it. Because I was really aware that the students, 50 students and one teacher, seems like a very unfair, to my mind, it's a very unfair advantage that 50 young, vibrant minds against an older, a crusty, solidifying mind of an elder, a teacher. I knew that I was at a disadvantage. That no matter what, once I was on to one way of cheating, they were already evolved through several generations of refinement and sophistication. And every student in my classroom at many advantages. Their computer skills, their math ability. I think the least of my students at the university had a much better grasp on mathematical concepts. They have calculus in high school. And I made no attempt, and when I did, it was in university third year, and I failed miserably. So, always being someone that didn't pull the wool over my own eyes, someone that spent their life lifting the wool, lifting the shortcomings of my egoic superiority. I'm a teacher, you're the students. So somehow in the social order of things, I'm quite a bit ahead of you. Well, it flies in the face of the facts that each of them individually was more gifted with me in many ways, more gifted than I in many ways, but then cumulative. I was a babe in the woods. I was helpless. I had no other than just going off the deep end and yelling and screaming and flunking them all. I understood that even though the teachers were expected to be disciplinarians, in many cases replacement for parental responsibility, I was always quite vocal in informing them I'm not their mom and their dad. I can't recall an instance where I lost my temper, where I got mad, where I acted like a father. Father in the sense of patriarch, the disciplinarian, the unquestioned alpha. So what to do? So what I came up with is increasing the difficulty of the test. I intentionally made my tests so difficult that no one would be able to complete the test within the 2-hour testing period. Even university students, native English students, anywhere else in the world, few, if any, could complete my test within the 2 hours allotted time. So my classroom was full. I had to kick them out and remind them that time was up and give them reminders, 5 minutes, and it was always a project to pry the exam out of their sticky little fingers. But then, because I understood the importance of grades to them, and I understood that nobody would pass my class, I graded on a very lenient curve. I was popular. One of the reasons I was popular is because I was an easy grader. And intentionally make them work their butt off for the test. Even the worst students, I figured we'd use a couple of midterms, or quarter terms, probably better term, and a final, so that I would get 6 hours out of everybody, 6 intense hours in a semester. And I thought, well, gee, even the worst students would give me 6 hours a semester. So I generously graded on a curve. And then I opened up. I said, look, everything's okay. Most of my classes were in a computer room where they had access to the internet. I said, use the computer. Use your cell phone. Talk quietly amongst yourself if you think that's going to help. Pretty much eliminate the need to cheat. There was nothing else. If you had a cheat sheet on your hand or your hat, go ahead and find it. But I challenge you to have the answers to the questions that I ask. And I would have some multiple choice, some matching, but I would also have a third of the test as you had to respond. And I got a kick, a laugh when I saw so many papers. You can really tell if people are cheating when on a multiple. You can see that there's a pattern. Maybe they all miss the same ones. But when you ask people to put a few words together and you see the same exact phrases over and over again, you're pretty sure. You can rest in great confidence that a lot of cheating was going on. But my goal was to eliminate the value of cheating. Open book, I forgot to say, open book, open computer, open cell phone, open dialogue amongst each other as long as didn't get out of hand. I didn't want them shouting answers across the room. But people could work together in their little groups, if they so inclined. But most of them tended to understand that this guy next to me doesn't know any more than I do, so I'm just as well off on my own abilities, just stand a better chance of myself. And I'm kind of busy. I'm feeling the pressure of how many questions are left and how little time. All by design on my part. And, I want to go backstep a little bit about this cheating thing and talk to you a little bit about cultural interpretation of cheating. The smart ones would always have people on both sides staring at their page. And I would call the student on that, say, you're letting your page, in the U.S. we taught someone's peeking at our page, we cover up, we might even verbalize. Keep your eyes on your own paper and protect it and hide it. Those the smarter ones. But here, they didn't even make an effort. So when I called them on that, I said, you're cheating. I said, no, teacher, I'm not cheating. They're cheating. They're looking at my paper. I had to explain to them that, no, letting them look at your paper, knowing that they're cheating, you're complicit, you're a cheater too. And they would tell me, teacher, I have to let them look at my paper. It's a social contract. If they want to be accepted, they have to make their work available to those. So the dumb ones would sit by the smart ones, And I had to educate, my role as an educator. But it's interesting that letting someone look at your paper wasn't cheating. It's kind of a culture